So in the last few days, it's come to light that the highly anticipated Dead Space 2 remake has been cancelled. After the previous Dead Space 1 remake scored so well in critic reviews, it would have made sense for EA to consider remastering the second installment of the franchise. Despite the rumours, no release date had been set. Then a few days ago it surfaced that EA had effectively completely cancelled the Dead Space 2 remake. According to Giant Bomb's Jeff Grubb, EA and Motive had planned to remake Dead Space 2, but the project was cancelled due to poor sales from the first remake. He said, "They were working on Dead Space 2 and they are no longer working on it. Now it's on the shelf because the first game had lackluster sales." EA has denied Grubb's assertion, saying that "We don't normally comment on rumours, but there is no validity to this story." Grubb then took to Twitter to double down on his claims that Dead Space 2 was discussed. According to Bloomberg's Jason Schreier, Motive did consider starting a new Dead Space project, but it was never really a Dead Space 2 remake. He reported that a small team at the studio actually kicked around ideas for a brand new Dead Space game altogether, but they didn't get far, and since then they've been doing other things for almost a year. So I think it's safe to assume that EA would have considered a Dead Space 2 remake if the original Dead Space remake had performed well, so it's reasonable to trust these quotes. From what we know, it seems like the studio who would work on this remake have now been moved to work on other projects, such as the Battlefield series and the upcoming Iron Man game. So although EA have denied the rumours, they've not specified what part of the rumours are untrue. But it's safe to say that no one is currently working on this game. So, in effect, they haven't cancelled the second game's remake, they've just shelved it. For now. Indefinitely. So, cancelled, right? To me, that's the same thing. The definition of cancelled is to decide or announce that something will not take place. Well, they haven't yet announced it, but it's pretty obvious as of right now there are no plans to begin work on it. Okay, so why wouldn't they push immediately into a second game remake if the first one scored so high? Well, in this video I plan to explain why they decided not to proceed with the Dead Space 2 remake, why I think they shouldn't do it, and what would happen if they did, and finally, why I think they should jump straight into making a new game in the series or Dead Space 4. Side note, I'm a new channel, so please consider subscribing if you enjoy the video. It would mean a lot. Anyway, back to it. So, why have they not pushed on with the Dead Space 2 remake? On Steam, the Dead Space remake has over 33,000 user reviews which average out to very positive rating. It got 9 out of 10 from IGN, 89% on Metacritic, 5 out of 5 on Tech Radar, 4.7 average from 377 ratings on Google. Bottom line is, it scored really well. But EA doesn't judge projects on review scores. They aren't really bothered whether we love the game or hate it. What they care about is one thing more than most: money. So, let's talk money. The game may have smashed its targets for performance on the gameplay, but when it comes to the sales, the game underperformed heavily. In EA's opinion anyway. EA had expected 5 million sales, and the game only sold 2 million. Whether or not 5 million is a realistic target or whether or not that figure is correct, the bottom line is EA had a sales target to meet and the game didn't come close to achieving that. Unfortunately, it's a business and the game has just not sold well enough for them to consider doing a Dead Space 2 remake, at least not immediately. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and then expecting a different outcome. If the Dead Space 2 remake dropped tomorrow, as excited as I and other Dead Space fans might be, the game would probably perform similarly. It would score well in the critic ratings and underperform in sales. This would not make EA happy, and as of right now, they've had to put the series on ice. If the second game's remaster performed the same, or even worse, that could lead to a permanent cancellation of the series that many love. Right, so why did it perform so badly financially? Well, first of all, it was a remake. It was the exact same game, just with better graphics. Although they added new side missions, dialogue, gameplay elements, it was still the same game, just with better graphics and tweaked a little bit. The original game that came out in 2008 sold 1 million copies. The remake sold 2 million copies worldwide. Now, let's compare this with Resident Evil 4 and its remake. The original Resident Evil 4 sold over 13 million copies, then the remake sold 7 million copies. So actually, in a way, the Dead Space remake outperformed its horror survival rival, selling double the original title's total. Resident Evil 4 only sold half of what the original did. Resident Evil 7 was a fresh title, not a remake. It sold 11.7 million copies. So, the brand new game outsold the remake. Final Fantasy VII Remake sold 7 million. Final Fantasy 15, a fresh game, sold 10 million. The remake reviewed better than 15, which had a lot of issues when it came out, but sales were still higher on the new title. So it's clear that newer, fresh games are just selling better than the remakes. So why is that? Well, now we're entering opinion territory, where you can agree or disagree with what I think. Although the remakes are nice, I am never quite as excited to play them as I was when I played the original game. And in reality, I'm less engaged than I was when I played the original. It almost feels like I'm visiting the same place that I've been before, just with a different perspective. Compare it to like a theme park ride, like a roller coaster. We only ever get to experience that ride's thrills and turns for the first time, one time. Now we can keep riding it, but each time it'll get a little less enjoyable, a little less exciting because we're getting used to it and we'll start to anticipate and predict everything that's coming. Or think about a TV show that we love. The first time we watch a TV series, it's exciting as we don't know what's coming next. We're jumping from episode to episode in order to find out what happens next. Everything that we see is new, it's shocking, it's surprising. Now, we can re-watch it, the whole series, and we'll still appreciate it, but it just doesn't give us that same tension and excitement that we had the first time. Or think about your favourite video game. How many times have you said, I wish I could experience my first playthrough on X game again? And the sad truth is, we will never have that same feeling that we have on subsequent playthroughs. Talking about Dead Space, when the necromorphs were first introduced in the entrance lobby, I remember being completely in shock. Like, I couldn't move my character. Like, what the heck is this thing? It's just attacked my crew members. Do you remember the first time you saw that necromorph? The heart-pulsing anxiety of running, not knowing where to go, what was happening, just in absolute panic about everything. It was an awesome experience. When the elevator door gets pulled open by the necromorph, it leaves you petrified, thinking that it's going to attack. Now, in the remake, I was ready. I didn't panic because I knew that I had to get to the elevator. I knew that the necromorph would open the elevator door. Rather than get into a panic, I was just appreciating the graphics and design. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that I didn't appreciate the remake. I love all Dead Space games and I'm extremely grateful that we got another game at all. I'm just saying it didn't hit me the same way. Let's say you have just enough money to buy one game, a new, highly rated title, or a remake of your favourite game ever. Now, you're probably going to get the remake, but if it's between a highly rated title or a remake of a title that you enjoyed but didn't obsess about, you'll probably put the remake on the back burner. You've had that experience before. You'd want something new. And unfortunately, the die-hard fans of the series will get you to your 2 million in sales, as has happened, but in order for EA to reach the 5 million that they want, they needed the other players as well. A new title will usually always outsell a remake, at least initially. Also, I've researched through a lot of Reddit posts, stream chats, and other gaming chat blogs, and I feel like a lot of people are getting tired and burned out from all the remakes. I mean, we've had so many. Resident Evil 2, 3, 4, all remade. Final Fantasy VII remake and then Part 2 remake. Shadow of the Colossus remake. Witcher 3 remastered. Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2 remastered. I mean, it's been a lot. And as much as fans love having their favourite games remastered, sometimes we just want a new title. I know that Dead Space will always be a masterpiece to me. The remake is not going to alter my opinion in any way. So, why do games even need remakes? Well, it's usually because a game is now dated. It's no longer up to today's graphical standards and maybe the controls can be improved for modern audiences. For this video, I had to replay Dead Space 2 for the footage, which is what you've been seeing in the background. It still looks gorgeous. For its time, it was miles ahead visually, and it scored almost 100% on critic reviews. I mean, just look at it. It doesn't really need a remake in reality. The first game had a lot of things that it could improve on, from the gameplay features like the zero grav and that awful asteroid shooter part. It was all quite limited visually and graphically. Dead Space 2 was a massive step up, and just looking at the game, ask yourself, why does it need to be remade? They could make the graphics a little better, but again it still holds up. Some games cry out for a remaster, and they really need it as they're almost unplayable in their original state to modern audiences. Dead Space 2 does not fall under that category. The game looked beautiful when it came out, felt great to play, and that is still the case today. So, all these points indicate to one thing. If they made a Dead Space 2 remake, it's going to perform the same financially as the Dead Space 1 remake. EA will be disappointed, and potentially they'll pull the whole series, and that will be the end of the hopes of any more Dead Space games for the foreseeable future. Add to that, the game generally doesn't need a remake as it still holds up exceptionally well today. For them to make the Dead Space 2 remake would be a decision that would not pay off, either for EA, for financial reasons, or for Motive and Dead Space fans, as it will harm the series in the long term. So I say all that to say this, I enjoyed the Dead Space remake. I was excited when it was released. I'd be excited if the Dead Space 2 remake was confirmed, but if they announced tomorrow that a Dead Space 4 game was coming out, I'd lose my mind. I'd be on blogs all day, searching for information I could find. I mean, imagine a new game. We don't know what's going to happen. What story? What characters? Same enemies? New enemies? Every time we go around a corner, we'd have to go slow because we don't know what the heck is lurking ahead and what's about to jump out. You know, all the major Dead Space fans would be on board, but then so would new consumers. It's a new title, period. Everyone gets a chance to experience a new title for the first time and hopefully recapture that feeling that we have when we play our favourite games ever for the first time. A new title allows returning players to experience something new fans to get into it, and most importantly, it allows a higher sales projection as a result, which is what we want so that we can keep receiving more Dead Space games. So in my opinion, if they were to skip the Dead Space 2 remake for now, let them instead put resources and time into a Dead Space 4, a new game. An injection of life into a series which has not seen a new game released for 11 years. With a new Dead Space title instead, they can please current Dead Space fans and potentially attract new ones as well. With a larger market to target, the sales should be higher, which would please EA and show that Dead Space is a worthy series for the future. By releasing a Dead Space 4, everybody wins. It would save the series, whereas another remake most likely won't. It will do the same as the last remake. It will fall short, as sad as that is to say, at least financially. So, back to my point of this video. Although it's upsetting that Dead Space 2 has been cancelled, or at least shelved, it's not the worst thing to happen. If we want more Dead Space games in the future, the next game that they release, the next Dead Space, has to outperform the last. One more underperformance in sales and it'll be another 10-year period of nothing for the fans. Based on the first game's sales, it's fair to say that Dead Space 2 would not blow those numbers out the water. They'd be around the same, or maybe even a tiny bit above or below. Either way, not enough to reach EA's required target. However, although they have shelved it for now, the game designers were beating around ideas for a Dead Space 4. I'm glad they haven't just run headfirst into another remake. I want them to consider going all out and making a new Dead Space game entirely. And if a cancelled Dead Space 2 remake is the sacrifice to accomplish that, then I'm all for it. Anyway, I expect a lot of people may be upset with this video, or perhaps you agree. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you think we need a Dead Space 2 remake, let me know why. We can have a civil discussion about it. As a huge Dead Space fan, this almost hurt to write, but sometimes pain is the best way to help us grow. I say, skip the Dead Space 2 remake, go all out on Dead Space 4, and give the Dead Space series a fighting chance to kick off again. Anyway, that's it for this one. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I'm Av Gaming, and I do video game analysis and reviews, highlighting what makes great games great, and what could make good games great too. I might be a small channel, but I am fully committed to this, and I hope that you join me for the ride. Thanks for watching, Av out.